When I got the job at one of the top firms in the city, I thought I'd finally made it. Everything seemed perfect. Great pay, an incredible team, and the kind of projects I'd always dreamed of working on. But there was one thing, or rather one person, that made the experience unforgettable. My boss, Derek. From the very first moment I saw him, I knew he was different. Derek wasn't just your typical boss. He had this presence about him, a charisma that made everyone sit up and pay attention the moment he entered the room. He was tall, confident, and always dressed in perfectly tailored suits. His voice was deep and commanding, but never harsh. He carried himself with this quiet strength that I couldn't help but admire. At first, I told myself it was just respect. I mean, who wouldn't look up to someone like Derek? He was smart, successful, and effortlessly in control. But over time, I realized it wasn't just admiration. It was something more, something I couldn't quite explain. I started noticing the little things, how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he loosened his tie at the end of a long day, how he seemed to always know exactly what to say to put people at ease. And then there were those moments when I'd catch him looking at me, just for a second too long. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wasn't. The first time he singled me out during a staff meeting, my heart practically stopped. "Ryan has been doing an excellent job," he said, looking straight at me. "He's someone I trust to handle critical projects." His words were professional enough, but the way he said them, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd replay every interaction we'd had, searching for clues. Was it all in my head? Or was there something between us? I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out, because the truth about Derek would change everything. I couldn't stop thinking about Derek. It was getting harder and harder to focus at work with every passing day. The smallest things about him, the way his eyes would lock with mine just a second longer than necessary, the calm but commanding tone he used when giving directions, kept playing in my mind. There was something about him that felt different. And as much as I tried to push the thoughts aside, the curiosity kept growing. One night, I stayed late to finish a report Derek had asked for. His office light was still on, and I figured I'd take a quick break to grab some coffee. That's when I saw it. Derek's office door was ajar. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked in quietly, intending to leave a file on his desk, but something caught my eye. A book, a leather-bound journal, was left open. Tucked inside was a letter. Without thinking, I picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, flowing, beautiful, even. The words stopped me in my tracks. "You mean more to me than I could ever say. Being with you feels like the one thing in my life that's truly mine." It wasn't signed, and I didn't recognize the handwriting. My heart raced, and I felt a strange mix of confusion and excitement. It felt personal. Too personal. I quickly put the letter back where I found it, my hands trembling. Who had written it? And more importantly, was it about Derek? The next day, my mind was still racing. I couldn't help but steal glances at Derek. He was the same, cool, confident, and untouchable, but now there was this sense of something hidden beneath the surface, something I couldn't ignore. Then, a week later, something happened that made everything even more complicated. I went out with friends to a bar downtown. As soon as I walked in, I spotted Derek in the corner. He wasn't alone. He was with another man. I watched, stunned. Derek was smiling, laughing, his body relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. I was seeing a different side of him, the real Derek. And when our eyes met, it felt like everything shifted. I couldn't get the image of Derek with that man out of my mind. I'd been trying to convince myself that I was overthinking it, but everything about the situation felt different. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, and for the first time, I realized I didn't know Derek at all. The next morning at work, I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept drifting back to the bar, to that moment when our eyes locked. It felt like a sign. Something had shifted between us. But what was it? As the day dragged on, I found myself unable to shake the feeling that Derek knew something had changed too. There was a subtle tension in the air between us. He was still his usual composed self, but there was an unspoken energy whenever our paths crossed. My heart would race every time he came close, as if I could feel the invisible pull between us, drawing us together. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to concentrate on an email when I saw Derek walk by, his stride purposeful, his gaze focused ahead. But then, without warning, he stopped in front of me. My stomach lurched. "Ryan," Derek said, his voice smooth, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "Can you come with me for a moment?" I followed him into his office, my mind racing. Was this it? Was he going to confront me about what I'd seen? Was he going to fire me for being a nosy employee? He closed the door behind us and turned to face me, his eyes scanning mine for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to keep something between us, all right?" My heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly want from me? Was this a test of some sort? Before I could say anything, Derek moved closer. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and the touch felt different. His fingers were warm, and I could feel the subtle tension in his grip. His voice dropped to a softer tone. "I don't want anyone to know about what you saw last night," he said, his eyes intense, searching my face for a reaction. "But I also need to be honest with you. There's something about you that's making it hard for me to stay professional." I froze. My mind raced, trying to process his words. He knew. He knew I had seen him, and worse, he was admitting that he felt something too. Derek leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "I don't want this to affect our work, Ryan. But I can't pretend any more." His hand moved from my shoulder, sliding down to rest on my arm, his touch lingering just a little too long. In that moment, I realized the game had changed. There was no going back. The lines between professional and personal had blurred, and neither of us seemed ready to draw them again. I stood there, frozen, as Derek's words lingered in the air. My mind was a whirlwind, struggling to make sense of everything. What had just happened? Did he really just admit that he felt something for me? Was this a dream, or had I crossed a line that I couldn't undo? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms growing sweaty. Derek was standing just inches away, his hand still resting on my arm, and the warmth of his touch sent electricity through my body. I wanted to pull away, to maintain my professional distance, but I didn't. I couldn't. I don't know what to say, I stammered, looking up at him. The confusion in my mind was overpowering, but there was also something else, something that felt like desire, like an undeniable pull between us. His eyes softened, and for the first time since I met him, I saw a vulnerability in Derek. He gave me a small, almost sad smile. "You don't have to say anything, Ryan. I just wanted you to know. I'm not asking for anything. But if you feel the same way, we can talk about it." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. He wasn't demanding anything from me. He wasn't pushing me for some grand confession. Instead, Derek was giving me space to decide what I wanted. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I thought I had control over my life, over my feelings, but everything had changed in that one moment. I couldn't ignore the heat building between us. Every time I saw Derek, I felt a magnetic attraction that was impossible to deny. But there was a bigger problem. He was my boss. If this got out, it would destroy both of us professionally. And on top of that, I still didn't know if he was just looking for a fling, or if he actually wanted something more. As I left his office, my thoughts were racing. What was I supposed to do? Would I be risking everything? My job, my future, my reputation, just to give in to this growing attraction? Was it worth it? I spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely able to focus on anything. Every time I saw Derek, I felt that familiar pull, the longing in my chest. But I also felt the weight of the consequences. I couldn't afford to make a mistake, not in a world where everyone was watching. But what if this wasn't a mistake? What if Derek felt the same way about me as I did about him? Could I take the leap, knowing the risk? Or was I too scared to face the unknown? The next few days felt like an endless loop of confusion and desire. I couldn't escape my thoughts about Derek. I'd try to focus on work, but every time I saw him, my mind would wander back to that moment in his office. The way his hand had lingered on my arm, the softness in his eyes when he spoke, and the unspoken promise that had hung between us. But what did that all mean? Was it just a passing attraction on his part, or was there something deeper? I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was waiting for me to make a move, but I wasn't sure if I had the courage. On the fourth day after our conversation, I found myself back in the office late again, just like before. Derek's office light was on, and this time I didn't hesitate. I walked toward his door with a mixture of fear and anticipation building in my chest. This was it. I had to decide what I wanted. When I knocked and entered, Derek was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. He turned as soon as he heard me, his expression unreadable. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of everything unsaid between us. "Ryan," he said quietly, his voice calm but laced with something that I couldn't quite place. "Derek," I replied, my voice betraying my nerves. I swallowed hard, my palms sweating. I had to do this. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, the words coming out before I could stop them. "And I don't know what this is between us, but I can't ignore it anymore. I feel something strong. But I'm scared." Derek's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He stepped toward me, slowly, his presence overwhelming. "I'm scared too, Ryan," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "But I've never been able to ignore what I feel around you. And I don't want to pretend anymore." I took a deep breath, my heart racing in my chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. "I want to be with you, Derek. But we can't let anyone find out. We both know what would happen if this got out. I can't risk everything I've worked for." Derek didn't hesitate. He reached out, cupping my face with one hand. His touch was gentle, but it sent shivers down my spine. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this work," he murmured. "I'll protect you, Ryan. You won't lose anything." In that moment, everything changed. I could feel the heat between us, the undeniable pull that neither of us could resist anymore. We stood there, inches apart, the world outside seeming so far away. Derek leaned in slowly, his lips brushing against mine with a softness that made my heart skip a beat. When we pulled away, his eyes were filled with something more than desire. There was hope. "We'll figure this out together," he said, his voice steady. And for the first time since I met Derek, I felt like I wasn't alone. We were in this together, no matter what the consequences might be. The days that followed felt like a blur, exciting, yet terrifying. Derek and I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The secret we shared was a heavy one, weighing on us both, but there was also a thrill in it. The stolen glances in the office, the subtle touches when no one was looking, the hushed whispers during late-night meetings, everything felt different now, charged with an electric tension. We were careful, so careful. No one could know. At work, we were still boss and employee, the professional masks firmly in place. But when we were alone, the walls came down. It was like a dance, a quiet, secretive dance where every word, every touch, carried a deeper meaning. One evening, after everyone had left the office, Derek called me into his office. The air was thick with anticipation as soon as I stepped inside. He was sitting behind his desk, the same confident, composed Derek I had always known, but there was something else in his eyes, a hunger, a desire that made my pulse quicken. "Close the door," he said, his voice low, almost commanding. I obeyed without thinking, and as I turned around, I found Derek standing only a few steps behind me. His eyes locked onto mine, intense and unwavering. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the tension between us almost unbearable. "I don't want to hide any more," Derek said, his voice rough. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't let anyone know, Ryan. Not yet. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat dry. I knew what was at stake. We couldn't risk the fallout, the scandal, the whispers behind our backs, the damage to our careers. But I also couldn't ignore the way Derek made me feel. The way he looked at me, the way his body responded to mine, was all-consuming. Without saying another word, Derek stepped forward, closing the gap between us. His hand reached for mine, pulling me closer, and before I could fully process it, his lips were on mine. The kiss was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was fierce, desperate, as if neither of us could wait any longer. His hand slid down my back, pulling me flush against him, and I could feel the heat of his body, the tension in every muscle. As we pulled apart, both of us gasping for air, Derek's voice was barely a whisper. "I need you, Ryan. I need you in a way I can't explain. But we have to be careful. We can't let anyone see us like this." I nodded again, my body still humming with the aftershocks of the kiss. I had never felt so alive, so wanted. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in him, I knew the risks. Our relationship had to remain a secret, a hidden part of our lives that only the two of us shared. In the days that followed, we found new ways to sneak around, new ways to be together without anyone noticing. The office became a battlefield of secrecy, each touch and glance an unspoken promise. We couldn't afford to slip up. But with every passing day, I realized that I was falling deeper, deeper for Derek and deeper into this dangerous game we were playing. Every moment felt like a test. Could we keep this secret? Could we keep this from everyone else at work? And as much as I tried to convince myself that I was in control, a part of me knew that I was already too far gone. Our relationship grew in the shadows, each moment stolen from the routines of our professional lives. Secret meetings became our sanctuary, whether it was an excuse to work late, a fleeting touch in the hallway, or a quick lunch meeting away from prying eyes. Every shared moment carried a mix of excitement and risk, but it was impossible to resist the pull we felt toward each other. One evening, we met in a quiet corner of a secluded coffee shop. Derek's hand brushed against mine under the table, sending a jolt through me. "I can't get you out of my head," he admitted, his voice low, intimate. I smiled, though the weight of reality was never far away. "We need to be careful, Derek. The office is starting to feel like a minefield." We shared a laugh, but the truth in my words was undeniable. At work, we tried to maintain a professional distance, but it wasn't easy. A glance too long, a comment too personal, and the tension between us would spark like a live wire. Every day was a tightrope walk, balancing our growing feelings against the need to keep everything hidden. The struggle became evident during meetings, where Derek's usual commanding presence occasionally faltered if our eyes met. I'd feel my cheeks heat, and I'd quickly look away, pretending to jot down notes. But outside of work, it was different. There were no masks, no need to hold back. In the privacy of his apartment, we could be ourselves. We talked about everything, our pasts, our fears, our hopes. Derek wasn't just my boss anymore. He was someone who saw me, who made me feel alive in ways I never thought possible. Despite the risks, I knew one thing for sure. This was worth it. As the door to Derek's apartment clicked shut behind me, the tension from the office melted away. He pulled me into his arms, his touch warm and grounding. "I've missed you all day," he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. "I was right there," I teased, but my voice wavered as his hands slid to my waist. "Not like this," he said, his voice deep and full of longing. His lips captured mine, slow at first, then urgent, as if making up for every stolen glance at the office that had to go unnoticed. The couch became our sanctuary, a space where the rest of the world didn't exist. His kisses trailed down my neck, igniting a fire that made me forget every risk, every fear. Here, with him, everything felt right. But the spell broke too soon when he sighed and pulled back, resting his forehead against mine. "We can't keep doing this, Ryan. The walls are closing in." I traced his jawline with my thumb. "Let them close. As long as I have this, us, I don't care." His eyes softened, but the shadow of doubt lingered. We both knew the danger, but neither of us was ready to let go. The silence in Derek's apartment hung between us, heavy with unspoken fears. He leaned back on the couch, his hand still resting on mine. "Ryan," he began, his voice hesitant, "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up without someone finding out." I shifted closer, letting my hand slide to his chest. "Why are we talking about them right now?" I asked softly, tilting my head to meet his gaze. "We're here, alone. Isn't this enough?" Derek's eyes softened, his resolve momentarily slipping. "You always know how to shut me up," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Good," I whispered, leaning in to press my lips against his. This kiss was different, deeper, more desperate, as if trying to savor the moment before the weight of reality returned. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. As we moved to the bedroom, the outside world ceased to matter. In the dim light, his touch was both tender and electrifying, a reminder of what we were risking and why it was worth it. But as we lay together afterward, tangled in the sheets, the tension crept back in. Derek's fingers traced absent patterns on my arm as he stared at the ceiling. "I keep thinking about Jenna," he admitted. "She's watching us, Ryan. She's not going to let this go." I propped myself up on my elbow, studying his face. "Then let her watch. We've been careful, Derek. She doesn't have anything concrete." His lips pressed into a thin line, unconvinced. "For now. But if she catches even a hint of the truth." I placed a finger over his lips, silencing him. "We'll deal with it. Together." His arm tightened around me, but the weight of his unspoken fears lingered. For now, we had each other. But for how much longer? The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and mounting tension. Jenna's persistent curiosity was impossible to ignore. Her smirks during meetings, the way she lingered near Derek's office, and her too casual questions sent a clear message. She was circling like a shark. One evening, as Derek and I sat together in his apartment, the weight of it all came crashing down. "Ryan," he said softly, breaking the silence, "we can't keep living like this. It's not fair to either of us." I tensed, my heart sinking. "Are you saying we should end this?" He shook his head, his eyes full of conflict. "No. I'm saying we need to take control. Hiding, sneaking around, it's not who I want to be. I want us to live without fear. Together." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "You're talking about coming out," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Derek said firmly. "But only if you're ready. This isn't just about me, it's about us." The thought terrified me. The whispers, the judgment, the possible fallout at work, it all loomed large. But then I looked at Derek, the man who had risked so much for me, and I knew what I had to do. The next morning, we walked into the office together. Jenna's eyes lit up when she saw us, as if she knew she was about to get confirmation of her suspicions. Derek didn't hesitate. He addressed the team during the morning meeting, his voice steady and confident. "There's something I need to share with all of you," he began. "Ryan and I are in a relationship." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Jenna's smug expression faltered, replaced with genuine surprise. "This doesn't change how we approach our work," Derek continued. "I value each of you and our professionalism here. But I won't hide who I am any more." I stood beside him, my heart pounding but my head held high. The fear I'd carried for so long began to fade, replaced with something stronger: pride. As the day went on, there were a few awkward stares, some whispered conversations. But to my surprise, most of our colleagues were supportive. Jenna, clearly caught off guard, avoided me for the rest of the day. That evening, Derek and I walked out of the office together. The tension that had weighed us down for so long finally lifted. As we stepped into the cool evening air, he reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. "We did it," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "Yeah," I replied, squeezing his hand. "We did." For the first time in weeks I felt free. Free to love, to live, to be myself. And with Derek by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next, together.